She dated him for a year, without knowing who he really was. The sky over the outskirts of New York ruptured. Torrential rain hammered against the rusted roof of a dilapidated bus stop. A single streetlight flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over the desolate night. Clara, a dedicated relief coordinator, stood under the leaking eaves, clutching a waterlogged portfolio. She was a woman who spent her days piecing together broken lives, but tonight, she looked like a portrait of exhaustion. Her mascara was smudged, and her trouser hems were caked in city mud. Across from her sat Liam in a weathered, manual wheelchair. His clothes were stained with the grime of the streets. A small notebook and a cheap pen peeked out from his jacket, the only signs of a voice he chose not to use. To the world, he was an invisible casualty of the urban machine. Clara did not approach him with pity. She simply slumped down onto the damp wooden bench right next to him and let out a long, shuddering sigh. She noticed his lips were tinged with blue from the chill. Without hesitation, she unwound her heavy red wool scarf, the only warm item she had, and gently draped it around his neck. She carefully tucked the ends to seal out the wind. Liam's eyes widened in genuine shock. He looked at her as if she were a mirage. Clara offered a faint, bitter smile.
Don't look at me like that, stranger. Tonight, I am just as disabled in spirit as you are. We are even.
She began to pour out the wreckage of her day. As a relief coordinator, she had just watched a young patient she had spent a year trying to save pass away. Her apartment was being foreclosed on, and her ex-boyfriend had called only to ask about his belongings. Liam remained in absolute silence, but his eyes softened into a profound, haunting empathy. Clara realized that in helping him, she was trying to keep herself from drowning. She looked out at the rain and said quietly, "This world is sometimes nothing more than a ruined bus stop. The only thing we can really do is lean into each other so we don't shake so much from the cold." A week had passed since that night at the bus stop. Clara sat on a weathered bench in Central Park. She was wrestling with an American Sign Language dictionary. She was determined to learn enough signs for the hearing-impaired children at her clinic. But her fingers felt hopelessly clumsy. Letting out a sigh of frustration, she looked up and froze. Nearby, beneath a large maple tree, sat Liam. He was in the same manual wheelchair. But today, his hands were alive. They moved with a mesmerizing grace. He was gesturing fluidly, as if conversing with a flock of sparrows. Clara stood up, clutching the dictionary. Surprise and genuine joy washed over her face as she approached him. "You are the guy from the bus stop, right?" Clara asked. She pointed toward his collar. "The red scarf. Do you still have it?" Liam looked up. His hands halted instantly. A brief flicker of hesitation crossed his eyes. Then, he slowly raised his hands, executing a series of elegant signs. Clara's eyes widened in disbelief.
Wait, it's the Roxas? Are you using actual ASL? This is incredible. I've been struggling with this book just for the kids at the ward. I am Clara. Could you possibly be my unofficial teacher? I promise to pay my tuition in coffee.
Liam stared at her. His survival depended on keeping strangers at a distance. Yet, there was something undeniably magnetic about her energy. Finally, he gave a slow nod. He pulled out his smartphone and silently typed his number into her screen. That evening, Clara's phone illuminated. "Coffee in New York is usually terrible, but I will try it. Lesson 1, your name is signed like this." Attached was a video of his hand spelling her name in the air. Over the next 6 months, their nightly video calls became the anchor of Clara's days. Liam, a little boy, laughed today. Clara signed one evening, her face radiant. "I accidentally signed love instead of apple." It was the first time he smiled since his surgery. Liam typed quickly. "Perhaps it was not a mistake, Clara. You truly bring love wherever you go." Clara noticed a profound stillness in Liam. He never interrupted. He listened purely with his eyes. She was drawn to him because he made her feel completely understood without a single spoken word. But watching his videos, Clara noticed something else. "You have beautiful hands," she signed casually. "Not a single callus. You don't have the hands of someone living on the streets." She meant it as an innocent compliment. But Liam visibly flinched. He quickly pulled his hands out of the frame. He typed a hurried deflection about wearing thick gloves, but the slight panic in his eyes left an imprint on Clara's mind. By the first snow, they were meeting frequently. One afternoon at the library, Clara caught Liam deeply engrossed in an advanced economics textbook. He snapped it shut the second he saw her, hiding it under a newspaper. Later, they moved outside. Clara pushed his wheelchair into a snow-dusted courtyard. "Trust me," she signed. She stepped onto the footrests of his wheelchair and wrapped her arms around his neck. Using her weight, she began to spin them both in a slow circle. They were spinning, lost in the moment, until the front wheel violently struck a hidden stone. The chair tilted sharply forward. In that split second, survival instinct eclipsed his performance. Liam's arms shot out with explosive speed. His hands clamped around Clara's waist in an iron grip. This was not the weak hold of an ill patient. It was the powerful force of a man with conditioned muscle. He instantly shifted his core, forcefully yanking the heavy wheelchair back into a stable position. Clara crashed into his chest. Her face was inches from his. Gasping for air, she looked down at the massive hands gripping her waist. "I am so sorry," she stammered. "I just wanted to dance." "But Liam, why are you so strong? You feel like an athlete." For a fraction of a second, Liam's eyes shifted. The sharp glare of a protector turned into the frantic realization of a man whose cover was blown. Slowly, he loosened his grip. He forced his hands to tremble as they fell to his lap. He looked into her eyes, manifesting overwhelming vulnerability. Clara swallowed hard, trying to dispel her sudden suspicion. "Your heart is beating so fast, Liam. I guess you were just as scared of falling as I was." They turned away in an awkward silence. Liam hurriedly signed, "The snow is cold. We should go inside." Pushing the chair, a nagging thought echoed in Clara's mind. Can a man bound to a wheelchair possess reflexes that fast? Yet, looking at his slumped shoulders, she pushed the thought away, blaming adrenaline. By the time a year passed, Clara had made her choice. She declined the advances of a wealthy doctor at her clinic. Instead, she chose to stay by Liam's side. She pushed his wheelchair over uneven pavements, indifferent to his lack of wealth. "I do not care about his legs," Clara told her friend over the phone. "I only care that when I am with Liam, I never feel alone in New York anymore." The deafening roar of a Manhattan afternoon was a stark contrast to the hushed sanctuary of the library. Yellow cabs blurred past. Their horns blared a relentless, aggressive urban symphony. Clara was gently pushing Liam's wheelchair along the edge of a bustling crosswalk. The brisk autumn wind whipped her hair across her face. Suddenly, her steps faltered. Her hands tightened on the rubber grips of the chair. In the middle of the chaotic intersection, stranded between lanes of unforgiving traffic, stood an elderly woman. It was Mrs. Miller, a familiar face from the neighborhood. Her silver hair was disheveled. Her eyes were wide with a harrowing, vacant panic. She clutched a half-knitted, faded blue sweater to her chest as if it were a life-preserver. Cars swerved aggressively around her. Drivers shouted obscenities through rolled-down windows. But she just spun in slow, terrified circles, completely lost in her own fractured reality. Clara did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She slammed her foot down on the wheel locks of Liam's chair, securing it firmly on the safe concrete. She turned to him, her hands flashing a frantic, desperate sign, "Wait for me." Before Liam could even process the danger, Clara sprinted directly into the chaotic current of the street. She dodged a screeching delivery truck to reach the island of chaos, where the old woman stood. Most people would have grabbed the disoriented woman by the arm. They would have forcefully dragged her to the sidewalk. Clara did not. Ignoring the blaring horns and the impatient stares of onlookers, Clara dropped straight down onto her knees, right there on the filthy, oil-stained asphalt. She didn't care about the sharp gravel biting into her skin. She didn't care about the black grime ruining her professional trousers. She simply needed to be at eye level. She reached out, wrapping her warm, steady hands over Mrs. Miller's violently trembling ones. "Mrs. Miller, look at me," Clara said. Her voice projected a calm, anchoring frequency through the noise of the street. "Your breathing is too fast. Look right into my eyes and take a deep breath." The older woman blinked. Tears spilled over her wrinkled cheeks. She looked down at the yarn in her hands, her voice a frail, desperate whisper. "I have to give the sweater to my boy. I have to finish it. He will be so cold out there." Clara's heart broke, but her gaze remained unwavering. She didn't correct the woman's delusion. She didn't coldly state the fact that her son had passed away years ago. Instead, she offered absolute, profound empathy. "I know," Clara said softly, her thumb gently stroking the back of the woman's weathered hand. "But this sweater, right now, it is here to keep your beautiful memory of him warm." She paused, offering a gentle, reassuring smile. "How about we finish knitting this one row together, right here, and then, I promise, I will take you safely home." Back on the sidewalk, Liam sat immobilized, watching Clara. His algorithm completely broke. He watched this brilliant, beautiful woman willingly throw herself into danger, kneeling in the city dirt, destroying her own dignity in the eyes of impatient drivers, all to comfort a stranger whose mind was slipping away. There were no cameras, no rewards, no underlying agenda. Clara was gaining absolutely nothing from this. A heavy lump formed in Liam's throat. The cynical fortress he had spent years building around his heart began to crumble, piece by piece. He realized that Clara wasn't acting. Her compassion wasn't a performance to win his affection. This fierce, self-sacrificing kindness was woven into her very DNA. She was, in the purest sense, undeniably good. And as he sat there in the cold, observing the light she brought to that dark, dirty stretch of concrete, Liam felt an overwhelming, terrifying warmth spread through his chest. He was completely, irrevocably captivated. The profound warmth Liam felt on that Manhattan sidewalk did not last. Reality was relentlessly closing in. It was late evening inside Clara's small apartment. The comforting smell of simmering stew filled the kitchen. But in the dimly lit living room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Clara was chopping vegetables. She glanced over her shoulder and noticed Liam acting strange. He was parked abnormally close to the living room window. His body was rigid. He peered through a narrow slit in the drawn blinds. His face was tight with intense vigilance. Outside, the street was mostly empty, until a sleek, heavily tinted black SUV crawled slowly around the corner. It rolled to a halt, parking in the shadows of the intersection. Liam's fingers flew across his phone. He held it up for Clara. "Clara, can you pull the curtains shut?" The streetlights. "They are giving me a terrible headache." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. She walked over, looking at the phone, then out at the street. "You have never been bothered by the light before, Liam," she said. Her voice was laced with undeniable suspicion. She pointed toward the window. "That black SUV, is it following you?" Liam avoided her gaze. His jaw clenched. His large hands tightly gripped the hem of his red wool scarf. He kept his eyes glued to the curtain, desperately waiting to see if a car door would open. An hour later, the immediate tension seemed to have passed. Liam had fallen asleep on the worn sofa. Clara was in the kitchen, pouring chamomile tea. As she walked back into the living room, she noticed something glinting on the rug near Liam's shoulder. It was a micro earpiece, sleek, black, and highly advanced. It must have slipped out of his ear while he slept. Clara set the tea down. She picked up the tiny device, intending to place it on the coffee table, but as her fingers brushed the microscopic speaker, a voice leaked out. It was a cold, clinical, and highly pressured corporate voice. "Sir, we have detected traces of the old board. They are actively searching for your location. The Vanguard merger is 90% complete. We need your signature immediately to secure the go. Assets, before they make their move. Clara froze. Her blood ran cold. Suddenly, Liam jolted awake. It was not the groggy awakening of a tired man. It was a violent, tactical snap into consciousness. Raw fear flashed across his face. It was the paralyzing fear of a hunted man. He realized his ruthless enemies might already be standing at the door. His hand shot out with terrifying speed. He snatched the earpiece from Clara's trembling fingers. In that singular fraction of a second, his mask shattered. Clara looked deeply into his eyes. She did not see the helpless, mute man she had cared for. She saw the sharp, lethal gaze of an apex predator, a billionaire king operating in an unforgiving world. But just as quickly, Liam realized what he was doing. He forced his broad shoulders to slump. He ducked his head, desperately trying to shrink back into the persona of the broken man. Clara took a slow step back. The silence was deafening. "I just heard something about a merger," Clara whispered. Her voice was trembling but sharp. "And a company called Vanguard." She crossed her arms, staring him down. "Is your earpiece picking up a rogue radio signal from next door?" Liam frantically typed on his phone. His hands shook. He shoved the screen toward her. "It is just an economics podcast. I listen to it to practice my English. You know I am terrified of being useless." Clara did not look at the screen. "The look in your eyes just now," she said, her voice dropping. "That was not the look of a man struggling to learn English, Liam. You looked like a man used to commanding the world, or a man running from a private army." Liam sat paralyzed in his weathered wheelchair.
I didn't mean
His chest
to.
heaved. He realized, with crushing clarity, that Clara was far too intelligent. She could not be kept in the dark much longer. His perfect cover had officially become his own inescapable prison. A wave of sickening guilt washed over him. He had taken her pure, selfless compassion and weaponized it as a shield for his survival. He understood the horrifying truth. If that black SUV outside was real, Clara was in absolute danger. She was now standing directly in the crosshairs of his enemies. He closed his eyes. The internal monologue screamed in his mind. "I want to tell her the absolute truth. But I am terrified. I am terrified that the exact moment I stand up from this chair, I will drag her into my swamp of betrayal and blood. I am borrowing the quiet peace of this innocent woman, just to hide from the violent destiny of my own making." The narrative violently shifted from the quiet, humble streets of the suburbs. It arrived at the unforgiving steel and glass of Vanguard Corporation in Manhattan. Vanguard had officially swallowed the small, struggling relief fund where Clara worked. Panic swept through the clinic like a virus. Rumors swirled through the cubicles about Vanguard's faceless CEO. He was known in the financial press only as the Silent Wolf. Word was that he planned to slash 50% of the charitable staff. He was coming to tear their operation apart. That evening, Clara sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by scattered files. She signed the terrifying news to Liam. She described the Silent Wolf as a ruthless, corporate butcher who only saw human lives as numbers on a spreadsheet. Liam sat frozen in his wheelchair. He remained perfectly, agonizingly silent. But beneath the table, his knuckles turned white. His large hand gripped the frayed edge of the red wool scarf she had given him. His eyes betrayed a violent, internal war. He had to make an impossible choice: continue hiding in the shadows to guarantee his own survival against his enemies, or stand up, expose his massive empire, and protect the woman he loved. The next day, Clara was the only one in the office refusing to pack her boxes. She stayed awake for 3 consecutive nights. She compiled a massive, detailed portfolio. It documented every single life their community projects had saved. Her exhausted coworker leaned against her desk, looking defeated. "Clara, you are crazy," the coworker said, shaking her head. "This CEO is a money-making machine. He is not going to care about a few disabled children. He certainly won't care about elderly people like Mrs. Miller." Clara did not stop typing. "If he is a machine," Clara replied, her voice fierce and unwavering. "Then I will find a way to plug into his heart. We cannot just give up and walk away before the battle even starts." The following morning, a crisp, terrifying email pinged in Clara's inbox. It was a direct summons from the CEO's executive secretary. Clara was ordered to present her case on the Tamworth floor, the absolute peak of Mount Olympus. Clara put on her most serious, sharpest black suit. She clutched her heavy portfolio to her chest. Her stomach was tied in nauseating, anxious knots. Yet, as she stood in the gleaming, intimidating lobby of the Vanguard Tower, her mind drifted away from the impending corporate execution. She thought of Liam. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed a text message. "I have an incredibly important meeting at noon today. Please remember to heat up the soup on the stove for yourself. I love you." 80 floors above the chaotic city streets, the atmosphere was freezing. The executive office was a vast expanse of dark marble and floor-to-ceiling glass. It was a room designed to make people feel small. Julian, no longer the broken Liam in a wheelchair, stood tall behind his massive mahogany desk. He wore a flawlessly tailored, midnight blue suit. His posture was straight, dominant, and terrifyingly powerful. He looked down at the sleek, encrypted smartphone resting on the desk. The screen lit up with Clara's text. "Heat up the soup. I love you." A heavy, suffocating silence swallowed the room. Julian's jaw clenched so tight it ached. The mask he had worn for a year was about to be ripped off, and it would be ripped off by his own hands. His executive assistant stepped into the room, holding a digital tablet. "Sir, Miss Clara is in the private elevator. Shall I send her right in?" Julian closed his eyes. He took a long, jagged breath, trying to steady the sudden pounding in his chest. "No," Julian commanded. His voice was a low, authoritative rumble that Clara had never heard. "Keep her waiting in the reception area for 15 minutes. He turned his back to the door and stared out at the sprawling, concrete empire of New York. I need 15 minutes to prepare myself mentally." The double oak doors of the executive office swung open. Clara stepped into a vast, minimalist sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the New York skyline. At the far end of the sprawling room sat a massive leather chair. It was turned completely away from the door, facing the cold glass. Clara gripped her heavy portfolio tightly against her chest. She took a deep breath to steady her racing heart. She did not wait for the CEO to turn around. "Mr. CEO," Clara began. Her voice rang clear, fierce, and defiant across the silent room. "You might have the capital to own this towering building. You might have ruthlessly bought out our small relief fund, but you do not own the souls of the people who work there." She took a bold step forward. "This world does not operate purely on profit margins and algorithms. It operates on fundamental human compassion and empathy that you have clearly abandoned." A heavy, suffocating silence hung in the air. Then, the leather chair slowly began to turn. Clara braced herself to finally face the silent wolf. But the face staring back at her made her heart completely stop. It was Liam. He did not look like the broken, forgotten man from the bus stop. He wore an immaculate, flawlessly tailored midnight blue suit. His posture was rigid, his gaze was piercing. And then the absolutely impossible happened. He placed his large hands on the armrests. He pushed his weight up, and he stood. He stepped forward onto the plush carpet. His strides were long, powerful, and impeccably steady. There was no wheelchair. There was no physical weakness. "That was a very good presentation, Clara," he said. His voice was a deep, commanding baritone. It was a voice she had never heard in the entire year she had known him, yet it echoed with absolute, terrifying authority, especially the part about compassion. Clara's hands went completely numb. The heavy portfolio slipped from her grasp. It crashed loudly onto the marble floor. Her lips trembled violently. The air was sucked out of her lungs. "Liam," she whispered, her voice cracking, "you can stand. You can speak." Tears of pure shock welled in her eyes. "This whole time, everything we shared, it was all just a play." Liam, now Julian, took a cautious step toward her. His dark eyes were filled with desperate regret. "I am so deeply sorry, Clara," he said softly. "I never wanted to deceive you, but you walking into my life was a beautiful accident outside of my dangerous reality." He pointed toward the sprawling city below them. "A year ago, there was a violent assassination attempt on my life. My own board of directors tried to have me killed. I faked my paralysis to make my enemies careless. That black SUV you saw outside your apartment, that was them tracking me. I planned to stay in the shadows until I could wipe them out. But then, my board bought your company." His voice broke slightly. "I could not stay hidden and watch them destroy your life's work. I chose to expose myself early. I stepped back into the crosshairs just to protect your job." He desperately hoped the grand gesture would earn her forgiveness. But Clara did not feel touched. She felt violently sick. The profound empathy she had offered him had been twisted into a disposable pawn. "You used survival as an excuse?" Clara spat. Her voice was laced with burning venom. "You used that pathetic excuse to sit back and watch me exhaust myself for an entire year." She took an aggressive step closer. "You sat in that wheelchair and watched me drop to my knees in the dirt for Mrs. Miller. Did you enjoy the show, Julian? Was my kindness just an entertaining movie for you?" Julian's face fell. "Clara, please, you have to understand." Smack. Clara slapped him, hard. The sharp sound echoed violently across the sprawling office. A bright red mark instantly bloomed on the billionaire's cheek. Julian did not flinch. He just took the pain. "You are not poor when it comes to money, Liam," she said, shaking with raw rage. "You are bankrupt in character. You borrowed my genuine sincerity just to fill the void of your own cowardice." With a swift, aggressive pull, she slid off the cheap silver ring he had given her. She threw it violently onto the pristine marble floor. It bounced and clattered with a hollow, tragic sound. Without another word, Clara turned her back on him. She walked out of the office. She stepped into the private elevator, leaving the tower behind. She walked straight out into the pouring New York rain, exactly like the night they first met. But this time, she left the silent wolf completely alone, trapped inside his golden empire. Clara vanished completely. She changed her phone number the very next morning. She submitted a brief, formal letter of resignation to the relief fund. She cut all ties to the corporate world and its empty promises. Instead, she sought refuge in a forgotten corner of the city. She took a low-paying job at a small, underfunded shelter for wandering elderly people. It was the exact same facility that cared for Mrs. Miller. Every single day, Clara scrubbed linoleum floors and administered medications. She tried desperately to erase the haunting memory of the broken man at the bus stop, but the pain of the deception was a heavy, constant ache in her chest. In the quiet, lonely moments of the night, Clara realized a profound truth. She did not hate Julian for being a wealthy billionaire. She hated him because he did not trust her. He had looked into her eyes and decided she was not strong enough to handle his dangerous reality. He had chosen the safety of a lie over the vulnerability of the truth, and that was the ultimate betrayal. Miles away, high up in the Vanguard Tower, Julian suffered in absolute silence. He did not chase after her. He did not ambush her at the shelter or flood her with desperate apologies. Instead, he turned his agonizing heartbreak into cold, calculated action. He unleashed the full, terrifying power of the silent wolf. In a matter of weeks, he ruthlessly purged the corrupt board members. He dismantled the shadow network that had orchestrated the assassination attempt. He eliminated every single threat. He finally made his world completely safe. Then, he began his silent redemption. One crisp morning, a convoy of delivery trucks arrived at Clara's humble shelter. They unloaded state-of-the-art medical equipment, premium oxygen concentrators, advanced therapeutic beds, high-tech heating systems. Everything was fully paid for by an untraceable, anonymous foundation. Because of this phantom donor, Mrs. Miller finally had a warm, specialized care unit of her own. Back in his towering office, Julian stood quietly by the glass window. His executive assistant stepped into the room and handed him a digital tablet. It displayed a photograph of the newly equipped shelter. "The installation is complete, sir," the assistant said respectfully. "Shall we inform the shelter's director about the true source of the donation?" Julian stared at the screen for a long time. His dark eyes were heavy with a profound, lingering sorrow. He handed the tablet back to his assistant. "No," Julian commanded softly. "Do not let her know it is me." He turned back to look out over the vast, sprawling city. She was absolutely right. I do not deserve her pure sincerity, not until I learn how to protect it without using lies. A golden afternoon sun bathed the suburban shelter in a warm, forgiving light. It was a world away from the cold, glass towers of Manhattan. In the quiet, vibrant garden, Clara was sitting on the grass. She was patiently teaching sign language to a group of disabled children. Suddenly, the peaceful silence was broken by the rumble of a heavy engine. An old, brightly painted school bus pulled up to the front gates. Bold letters across its side read, "The Bus of Hope." The doors hissed open. The man who stepped down was not a ruthless, immaculate CEO. It was Liam. He wore a simple faded sweater and worn jeans. In his large hands he carried a tote bag filled with colorful balls of yarn. He did not walk toward Clara. Instead, he walked straight over to a wooden bench under a large oak tree. He sat down right next to Mrs. Miller. Quietly, he pulled out 2 knitting needles. He began to knit. His massive hands were clumsy and awkward, but he moved with absolute, unbroken patience. Clara stood up from the grass, her heart painfully clenched in her chest. She marched over, fully intending to ask him to leave, but as she got closer, she stopped dead in her tracks. Liam was looking at Mrs. Miller. He was awkwardly but gently using ASL to communicate with the confused old woman. "What are you doing here, Julian?" Clara asked. Her voice was tight, trying to hold back a flood of emotions. Is Vanguard not busy enough? Do you really need to waste your time in this poor neighborhood? Liam did not look up immediately. His clumsy fingers kept wrestling with the blue yarn. "Vanguard can operate perfectly well without me," he said softly, "but I cannot operate without the truth." He finally looked up into her eyes. "I did not come here as a CEO. I came here to pay my tuition to my favorite teacher." "Tuition," Clara whispered, her defensive walls cracking. Liam nodded slowly. "You taught me how to truly listen with my eyes. Now, I want to learn how to love with all of my weakness. No more corporate masks, no more wheelchairs to hide my terrible fears." He reached into his tote bag. He pulled out a familiar, slightly frayed object. It was the old red wool scarf Clara had wrapped around him on that freezing night. He handed it back to her. Then, without hesitation, he reached out and took both of her hands. He held them openly, fiercely, right in the bright sunlight. "I have completely removed the last of my enemies," Liam said. His deep voice was steady and full of absolute certainty. "My world is finally safe for you to step into. I cannot promise to be a flawless billionaire, but I promise to be a man who will always stand firm, a man you can safely lean on whenever you are tired." Clara looked down at their intertwined hands. A single tear slipped down her cheek, catching the golden light. Then, a soft, genuine smile broke across her face. "Stop making promises, Liam," she whispered. She gently pulled her hands free and picked up the ball of yarn. "Just take these needles and finish knitting this last row for Mrs. Miller. That is the real work of a decent man." The camera slowly pulled back, rising high above the peaceful garden. Clara sat down on the wooden bench right next to Liam. She gently placed her hands over his. Together, they guided the needles, helping Mrs. Miller finish the sweater. Draped over the back of the bench, the red wool scarf glowed brilliantly in the sun. It was no longer a shield against the bitter cold. It was the ultimate symbol of a love that had survived deception, finally finding its way back to pure, unbroken sincerity. Sometimes, the greatest wealth is not money. It is the courage to drop our masks. True compassion can truly save a broken soul. What would you do in Clara's shoes? Would you forgive Julian? Tell us in the comments. If this journey touched your heart, please leave a like. And do not forget to subscribe to the Soul Stirring Stories channel. Hit the notification bell for more emotional journeys. Thank you for watching. Stay kind and stay sincere.